had nothing left to lose. He'd just sold himself off as the most pathetic husband in Pottawatomie County. Then a stranger with healing hands and secrets of her own placed her palm on his chest and changed everything. Council Bluffs, Iowa, 1875. The railroad had brought fortune seekers, gamblers, and the desperate alike to this muddy frontier crossroads on the Missouri River. The couple's hall in Council Bluffs reeked of pomade, tobacco, and nervous sweat. Outside, the Missouri River churned brown and restless beneath a sky-threatening rain. Inside, 40 men stood in rows like cattle at market, waiting to be chosen by the dozen women who'd traveled west by rail, seeking husbands among Iowa's frontier bachelors. Cyrus Holloway stood near the back, hat in hand, boots caked with the dust of Walter Crandall's ranch, where he'd broken his back for 15 years and still owned nothing to show for it. He was a tall man once, before time bent his shoulders forward. Gray streaked his beard. His hands, thick-knuckled and scarred, told the story of every fence he'd strung and every horse he'd gentled. The women moved down the line, asking questions, judging postures, weighing futures. Most bypassed Cyrus entirely. One young blonde widow named Sarah Whitlock paused, looked him over, and moved on without a word. He didn't blame her. Near the front, a portly merchant named Otis Tanner leaned toward his friends and snickered. "Holloway here's been passed over more times than a collection plate at an empty church." Laughter rippled through the hall. Cyrus felt his face burn. "Speak up, Cyrus," someone called. "Tell the ladies what you're offering." He should have stayed silent. Instead, something bitter and tired rose up in his throat. "An old ranch hand isn't much of a catch," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Nothing but calluses and bad knees. Save yourselves the trouble." The room erupted in laughter again, crueler this time. That's when the door at the back of the hall opened, and a woman none of them recognized stepped through, rain-soaked and quiet, carrying a leather satchel that looked older than she was. If a story about an unexpected love proving its worth speaks to you, hit subscribe. This Iowa frontier tale is just getting started. She was perhaps 30, with dark auburn hair pinned loosely beneath a traveling bonnet, and eyes the color of strong tea. Sharp, assessing, unbothered by the room's mockery. Her dress was plain, practical, patched at the hem from hard travel. She didn't belong to the social. She'd simply walked in out of the storm. The hall fell into an uncertain hush. "Ma'am, this here's a private gathering," the auctioneer, a balding man named Reginald Foss, said, stepping forward. "I heard a man laughed at for his calluses," she said. Her voice carried an accent Cyrus couldn't place, something Eastern, refined, worn down by distance. "Calluses mean a man's worked every day of his life. Where I come from, that's not an insult. That's a resume." A few uneasy chuckles answered her, but no one laughed outright this time. She crossed the room directly to Cyrus, ignoring the stares. Up close, he could see exhaustion carved into her face, dark circles, a thinness at her wrists that spoke of missed meals. "My name is Margaret Ashby," she said. "I'm a healer, was trained by my father, a physician in Boston, before he passed. I came west on the rail line looking for work and a fresh start, and instead I find a room full of men sizing up women like livestock, and one man telling the truth nobody wants to hear." Otis Tanner scoffed. "And what's that got to do with Holloway?" Margaret looked at Cyrus directly, ignoring the merchant entirely. "You're worth more than you know, Mr. Holloway," she said. "Most men in this room wouldn't have the spine to say something honest in front of a crowd that wants to humiliate them. I'd rather marry honesty than charm." The hall went dead silent. Cyrus stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "You don't know me," Cyrus said finally, his voice rough. "Don't know a thing about me. I know you stood in front of a room of strangers and told an unflattering truth rather than a flattering lie," Margaret said. That tells me plenty. Reginald Foss cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss Ashby, if you intend to, that is, if you wish to be matched here, there's a process, a fee. I have $11 to my name, Margaret interrupted. I don't need ceremony, I need a roof, honest work, and a man who won't lie to me. Mr. Holloway seems to qualify on at least 2 counts. Laughter sputtered weakly through the crowd, but it had lost its teeth. The cruelty had curdled into something closer to bewilderment. Cyrus felt his pulse hammering. He thought of Crandall's ranch, the bunkhouse cot he'd slept on for 15 years, the fact that he owned exactly 1 horse, a saddle, and $40 saved in a tin box. He thought of dying alone in that bunkhouse someday, unremarked, unmissed. I've got a homestead claim, he said slowly. 40 acres outside town, near Lake Manawa. Cabins rough, land's rougher. I don't have much. I didn't ask what you have, Margaret said. I asked if you'd have me. The hall waited, breathless, for his answer. Yes, Cyrus said. I'd have you. Foss, flustered but practical, produced a marriage license faster than seemed legally proper, and within the hour, Cyrus Holloway and Margaret Ashby were husband and wife, strangers bound by a storm, a satchel of medicines, and a sentence neither of them could take back. This story's only beginning. If frontier romance with real stakes is your thing, subscribe now so you don't miss where this goes. The wagon ride to Cyrus's homestead took most of an hour, rattling along rutted trails skirting the edge of Lake Manawa, the late afternoon sun breaking weakly through retreating storm clouds. It's not much, Cyrus admitted as the cabin came into view. 1 room, sagging roof, a barn missing half its boards. Crandall let me build here on land he claimed but never worked. Said I could have it if I proved it up within 5 years. 3 years left. Margaret studied the property with the same assessing eyes she'd turned on him in the hall. It has bones, she said. Bones can be fixed. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A cot, a stove, a shelf of tools. Margaret set her satchel on the table and opened it carefully, revealing rows of small glass bottles, dried herbs tied in bundles, a mortar and pestle worn smooth with use. What's all that? Cyrus asked. Willow bark, for fever and pain. Yarrow, for wounds. Boneset, for the ague. Calendula, for burns and infection. She touched each bundle like an old friend. My father taught me before consumption took him. I tended soldiers during the war's last years, then drifted west when there was nothing left for me in Boston. You could earn good money in town with skills like that, Cyrus said. Doc Pearson's getting old. Folks complain about him constantly. I tried registering as a healer in 3 towns before this one, Margaret said, a flatness entering her voice. Men don't trust medicine from a woman's hands. They'd rather die slow under a man's care than live under a woman's. Cyrus said nothing for a moment, turning that over. I'll trust your hands, he said finally. Already have. Fool that I am. Margaret almost smiled. Almost. 3 days into their strange new marriage, a rider approached the homestead at a hard trot, stirring dust across the yard. Cyrus stiffened at the sight of him. Walter Crandall himself, ranch owner, broad and red-faced atop a fine bay gelding. Holloway, Crandall called, not dismounting. Heard you went and got yourself a wife. That's right, Cyrus said evenly. Crandall's eyes slid to Margaret, standing in the cabin doorway, then back to Cyrus. Didn't think you had the coin for a wedding license, let alone a household. Last I checked, you still owed me $18 against your wages. Advance I gave you last winter, for medicine you never explained. Margaret's expression flickered, but she said nothing. I'll pay it, Cyrus said. Same as always. You'll pay it by the proving deadline, Crandall said, or I take this claim back and sell it to the railroad survey crew. They've been sniffing around Lake Manawa for a spur line. Land like this, near water, near rail, worth 4 times what you think it is. You've got 3 years on paper. I can make it 3 months if you cross me." He wheeled his horse and rode off without waiting for a response. Margaret stepped down from the doorway once he'd gone. "You never mentioned debt. Wasn't relevant before," Cyrus said. $18 for medicine. My mother. She was sick most of last winter, down in Glenwood. I borrowed against my wages to pay a doctor who didn't even help her. She died anyway." Margaret's face softened, just slightly. "I'm sorry. Don't need pity. Need $18 and a way to keep this land out of Crandall's hands before he finds an excuse to take it early." Margaret looked toward the lake, toward the cabin, toward him. "Then we find a way," she said. The opportunity arrived faster than either expected, and from an unlikely direction. Word spread through Council Bluffs that the railroad survey foreman, a hard-driving man named Augustus Reed, had taken ill at the worksite near the river. Fever, chills, a wound on his leg gone septic after an accident with survey stakes. Doc Pearson, town's only registered physician, was 3 days deep in a whiskey binge and in no state to treat anyone. Margaret heard the news from a neighbor woman, Constance Dubois, who'd stopped by to trade eggs for soap. "Half the crew's terrified he'll lose the leg," Constance said. "Or worse." Margaret didn't hesitate. She packed her satchel, pulled on her boots, and told Cyrus to hitch the wagon. "You can't just walk in and treat a man Pearson's supposed to be treating," Cyrus warned as they rode toward the river camp. "Folks already distrust you. A woman healer overstepping a licensed doctor. A man might lose his leg or his life. While I worry about what folks think," Margaret said sharply, "I didn't come west to be cautious." At the survey camp, chaos reigned. Men shouting, Reed groaning on a cot, the wound an angry red, streaked black at the edges. Margaret pushed through without asking permission, examined the leg in seconds, and called for boiling water, clean cloth, and her calendula tincture. "Who in hell is this?" Reed gasped through gritted teeth. "Someone who knows infection when she sees it," Margaret said, already working. "Hold still, or you'll lose more than dignity." Cyrus watched her hands move with absolute precision, calm amid the panic, and felt something shift in his chest he hadn't expected. Pride, fierce and sudden. Watch what happens when she saves the man everyone gave up on. Subscribe now to see the whole Frontier story unfold. By the time the fever broke 2 days later, word of what happened at the survey camp had traveled the length of Council Bluffs. Augustus Reed walked, limping, but walking, and was loudly, publicly grateful to the woman who'd saved his leg when the town's own doctor had been too drunk to try. "Foreman wants to pay you," Cyrus said, reading a note that had arrived by messenger. "Says the railroad company will cover it. $25. Margaret stared at the figure, stunned. $25 for 3 days' work. "More than that," Cyrus said. "Foreman's putting in a word with the company surveyors. Says if you're willing, there's 40 more men on that crew who'd pay for proper care, instead of relying on whatever quack medicine they're carrying themselves." It should have felt like victory, and in some ways it did. But word also reached less friendly ears. Doc Pearson, humiliated and sobering up enough to feel the sting of it, began muttering in town about unlicensed quackery and dangerous female meddling. Otis Tanner, still smarting from the social hall embarrassment, fed the rumors gleefully at the mercantile counter. And Walter Crandall, hearing that Cyrus Holloway's wife was suddenly earning real money from the railroad crew, rode back out to the homestead with new calculations turning behind his eyes. "Heard about your wife's little medical adventure," Crandall said, not bothering to dismount this time either. "Railroad's interested in this stretch of land for more than a spur line now, Holloway. Whole depot, maybe. You understand what that means for property values?" "Means you want this land worse than ever," Cyrus said. "Means I want my $18, Crandall said. "And I want it within the month, or the proving claim reverts to me regardless of your 5-year paper." Read the fine print sometime." He rode off, leaving threat hanging thick in the dust behind him. Cyrus spent that night by lamplight, squinting at the homestead paperwork he'd signed 3 years earlier, while Margaret cleaned instruments at the table beside him. "Here," he said finally, voice tight. "Clause says if outstanding debt to the original grantor exceeds $10 at any inspection point, grantor reserves right to reclaim improved property at market value, minus debt owed." He set the paper down. Crandall wrote himself an escape hatch from the start. Knew exactly what he was doing. "Then we pay him before he can call an inspection," Margaret said. "With what? Your railroad money's good, but it's not here yet, and Crandall could ride out with their inspector tomorrow if he wanted to move fast." Margaret was quiet for a moment, thinking. Constance mentioned the railroad company pays healers a retainer for ongoing camp medical work. Standing contract, not piecemeal. If I secured that, that's weeks away, maybe months. Contracts like that take time to draw up. "Then we ask Reed for an advance," Margaret said. "He owes me his leg." Men remember debts like that if they've any honor in them. The next morning, they rode to the survey camp together. Augustus Reed listened to their predicament with a grim expression, then surprised them both. "I can't advance company money," he said, "but I can do better. I'll buy timber rights on your land outright. There's good oak and walnut stands the railroad needs for ties and trestle work. $18 paid today against future harvest. That settle your debt and keeps Crandall's hands off your claim." Cyrus felt something loosen in his chest for the first time in days. "Why help us this much?" he asked. Reed glanced at Margaret. "Because she didn't ask whether I deserved saving before she saved me. Don't see much of that out here." They paid Crandall his $18 3 weeks before any inspection could be called, in cash, in front of 2 witnesses from town, leaving him sputtering with no legal ground left to stand on. He rode away from the homestead for the last time, and Cyrus never saw him again. The railroad's medical retainer came through that autumn, formalizing what the camp had already known. Margaret Ashby Holloway was the most trusted healer between Council Bluffs and Glenwood, licensed doctor or not. Doc Pearson's grumbling faded as his own drinking caught up with him, and eventually he retired, leaving the territory's care largely in Margaret's capable hands. The cabin grew 2 new rooms by the following spring, paid for with timber money and medical fees both. The barn got proper boards. The 40 acres near Lake Manawa, once worthless scrubland Crandall had been glad to dump on a tired ranch hand, became some of the most sought-after property in the county once the railroad spur was confirmed. One evening, sitting on the porch they'd built together, watching the sun set gold over the lake, Cyrus finally asked the question that had haunted him since the social hall. "Why'd you really pick me that night?" Honest answer. Margaret considered it seriously, the way she considered everything. "Because everyone in that room was performing for each other. You were the only one telling the truth, even when it cost you. That's rarer than you'd think, Cyrus. Rarer than gold some days." He took her hand, calloused fingers wrapped around hers. "An old ranch hand isn't much of a catch," he said softly, echoing himself. "You're worth more than you know," she answered, just as she had the first time. Still true, always will be. If this story moved you, subscribe for more